Books contain stories, but if you look close enough at the paper, bindings, book plates, library marks, they also tell stories about how they were made, about where they've been, and about the lives of the people who've held them. The books are talking, if we listen closely enough. In today's episode, we're taking a look at a 15th century handwritten manuscript that's a copy of a 12th century text. And exploring a series of clues, we're going to ask it, how did you get to Iowa? So, we know that books can tell us some things.
Yeah.
So, how do we find out?
I think this book has three things to tell us. One of them is the paper. It's made on paper, and paper often has a watermark. I don't know if this one does or not, but we're going to find out. And if we can match it with some reference material, we might be able to say when the paper was made and where the paper was made. The second clue, I think, is this inscription right here, because look, 15th century writing, not 15th century writing.
Yeah, those are totally different.
Right, and I think it says something about where it was held at one time, and this might be something like an old shelf mark or call number of where it was held in some kind of a library. And the third one is this. This is the cover that it arrived in at the University of Iowa Special Collections. And this cover says Fragment de Virtutibus, right? But underneath it says 15th century with the Roman numeral 15 and the German abbreviation for century, which is Jahrhundert. Up here, and you might know this better than I do, I think it looks like a book catalog number maybe.
So
maybe it was sold or bought at a book collector's in Germany or Switzerland at some point. But these are the three clues we have.
Okay, so we've got clues about where it maybe started.
Yes.
And some clues about where it was in between, so hopefully we can figure out how it got here.
Hopefully we might be able to connect the dots.
We're going to head back into the stacks and check all of our reference materials and follow up on all of those clues that the manuscript was telling us. So we researched the clues.
Right.
And what is it that we found?
Well, let's start with that first one.
Sure.
The watermark, right? Okay, so we found a watermark, and it's super cool. It is a crown on top of a fleur-de-lis, and it's actually identifiable in briquet. And so when we look back in briquet's information, we find that that exact watermark appears in a manuscript that was made in Paris around 1475. Kind of our time period, right? And there's another manuscript as well it appears in Oxford. What's the connection?
Universities?
Absolutely. I think so. I think we're onto something, okay? And the second thing would be sort of these red and blue alternating initials, okay? That also indicates Paris. It's not exclusively Paris, but it definitely supports a Paris origin.
Yeah, it
okay?
fits with the other evidence.
Right. The other important thing, when you mention universities, Paris. It was a big university for people who wanted to study theology. This is a theological treatise, right? And so I think that it would make a lot of sense if maybe a student copied this or had it copied, right?
Absolutely.
If so, it wasn't a cheap copy because it's got this illuminated initial, okay? But it wasn't super expensive because the student didn't go to the trouble to put the images in.
They left a big blank space instead of paying someone to put in a full illustration.
Right, which again makes me think student, because maybe the student didn't need the images to understand the Latin and understand the ideas that are being talked about in this text.
Okay, those all make sense together.
So do we think maybe a Paris origin?
That's what it sounds like.
That is so cool.
So clue number 2 was this writing. What is it that the research tells us about this?
This is really interesting, Colleen. So this writing actually says the Monastery of St. Peter's of Chezal-Benoit of the Congregation of Maur. Okay? That is an abbey. Chezal-Benoit is an abbey in the center of France, south of Paris, near the city of Bourges, right?
Okay.
And the cool thing, oh my gosh, what was happening at this abbey at the exact time that this manuscript was being written? It was being reformed. The first abbot who comes to the abbey of Chezal-Benoit to reform it is from Paris.
Okay, we've got a Paris connection.
We've got more than one, because then these two other guys follow. One who was the rector of Paris earlier, and one who was a professor at the University of Paris. They both pass through the Abbey and go to other places, but retire at the Abbey to die. So I would imagine that these guys may have brought the manuscript with them and then just left it in the library after they died.
Great, there's 3 possibilities with connections between Paris and the Abbey.
Yes.
Okay, so we know we started in Paris.
Yes.
And we moved to a monastery in central France.
Right.
So do we know anything about where it went next?
This cover seems to indicate that it was at some point in a German or Swiss bookseller's shop. And that's what I think that mark is?
Yeah.
If it was sitting in a German bookseller's shop, how did it get to
Iowa?
Right. And I think the answer to that is in this book, because this is an autobiography by Charles A. Fick, who was a German immigrant to Iowa. In the mid-19th century, we had a very big influx of German immigrants.
Yes.
And some of them became very well-established citizens, and they ended up traveling around the world and often going back to Europe to visit relatives. Right?
And you can see the list here of all the places that he visited, going to Europe, going back to Europe, even as far as Egypt.
I know.
And Siberia.
I know.
And it lists here specifically that he was purchasing rare books.
Yes. So I think they were very conscious of that. So if I was to have to make a guess, I would say this started in Paris. It went to Chezal-Benoit in the middle of France, ended up somewhere in a German bookseller's shop, and was bought by an immigrant who came to Iowa, and it somehow came to the University of Iowa.
To the University of Iowa collections here, so that we could look at it today.
It's pretty awesome, isn't it?
That's what the book was telling us.
I think so.
Credo in unum Deum, Patrem omnipotente, Factorem celi et terrae, visibilium